Hello and welcome to another episode of MediaSnack live from London. The more observant of you will realise that the person facing me on the other screen is not Tom Denford. It is Paul Stringer, who's one of our consultants. Paul can't make it today, but in his relatively short, small shoes, I'm sure Paul will do really well. So Paul, welcome to MediaSnack. You feeling good?
Thank you. Thanks, David. Yep, feeling good, up for this and excited to be here.
Very good. Well, listen, the reason that we've got Paul on the show today is because the topic of today's show is the publishing of a white paper that we have worked collaboratively with ISBA on, and it's around best practice in media agency management. And it's a brilliant piece of work that we've supported ISBA and their media leadership team on, and Paul was an important contributor to that sort of document. So I want to get Paul's perspective on the guidelines and why he feels they're important. To introduce the guest that we have on the show today is a member of ISBA, and if we can bring her onto the screen, please. Bobi Carley, who is head of media at ISBA and who provided the stewardship for the program that we went through the initiative, and it was launched yesterday, right, Bobi?
That's correct. Yeah, it's been great working with you guys, and it's been really well received. So thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you for coming on the show, firstly, but also thank you for inviting us to contribute to such an important piece of work. We've loved it, by the way, and we hope that it will add real value to your members moving forward. So, Bobi, if it's okay with you, then Paul and I are just going to have a bit of a chit chat and talk a little bit about the guidelines and the principles, and then we're going to bring you back onto screen, and then we're going to ask you some questions about the guidelines and why you came up with the guidelines with your members, if that's okay.
Perfect. See you shortly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Paul, best practice in media agency guidelines, and it's a particularly important topic for me because for many years I spent as a media leader within a client organization, both at Nike and Coca-Cola, and so I can understand and see the value in having a deeply rooted, strong relationship with your agency partners, but it takes work, and most of the really good client agency relationships that I've been involved in, that I've seen, have been based on trust, a general respectfulness, and an alignment on goals. And when those things come through, then you can see incredible value from partnership, because ultimately a media agency is responsible and providing the guardianship of that media investment on behalf of the client. And if they can get that right, then that value can be exponential to the investment of media. So we worked, as I said, we worked closely with ISBA and their media leadership group. We surveyed them, we interviewed them, and the output was a white paper which focused on 6 key principles and guidelines that we feel would reflect best practice when it comes to agency management. So perhaps, Paul, do you want to sort of share with us what those 6 were, and we can perhaps have a discussion on why they were so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's kick off by talking about our first principle, which is internal alignment. And this is really about making sure that you have your stakeholders aligned behind a clear ambition for media, and also that you have clear ways of working to support that ambition, to ensure that you are managing media in a responsible, smooth and efficient way.
Yeah, so having that ambition around media internalized, it not only does it galvanize your own internal stakeholder group, what we found is it's really important in raising media within the corporate agenda higher, but it also allows you to articulate the role that media will play in delivering a business outcome, right? That's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to make that a really inclusive narrative, both internally. But if you can get that right, then that translates to a very clear description to your agency partners of the role that they can play in enabling that to happen. So that's the reason that that internal alignment around some mission statement and a clear way of working is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, something interesting that came out of the study we did with ISBA members is only around 38% believe that they have a clear vision for media, which I personally found quite surprising. But I think it shows that actually behind crafting an ambition for media, there is a fair amount of complexity, and making sure that you follow a clear, streamlined, and most importantly, an inclusive process is really, really important to arrive at an ambition that makes sense to not only your immediate media stakeholders, but also the wider business.
Yeah, well said. Well said. What was guideline number 2?
So our second guideline was really based around agency selection and identifying the most suitable partner to work with you on your business.
And so, in the guidelines, within the guidelines, there are steps, right, that we suggest brands and advertisers should go through in terms of understanding what the right model is, because it's no longer as simple as just going out to the holding companies. There are so many different options out there available that having a clear understanding of what the right agency operating model is before brands go to tender will make that tendering process far more effective. So that's the first stage, right? Being really clear what you're asking the agency ecosystem or the agency community to respond to. So having that clarity of blueprint, and then going to market with a structured, clearly well-designed strategic process that balances the need of procurement perhaps and the commercial side of the business, but also what is really more critical now, and that's having that strategic thinking that the agencies can provide that will drive the effectiveness of that media investment. So those stages are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, something that's really encouraging that we've seen in the survey that we sent to members is around 3/4 believe that they have a clear and rigorous process that they follow for agency selection. And that's something that I found really encouraging, actually.
Good, good. And what about guideline number 3? What have we got next?
So next up under guideline number 3 is around contracts. So this is about really making sure that you have transparent and fair contractual principles that really go towards building long-lasting and sustainable partnerships with your agency.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you know, the contract there is there to hold both parties to account, right? That's really, really important. And ISBA obviously have championed best practice when it comes to media agency framework agreements. They've established the first one, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. There was a second iteration a couple of years ago, and I think they're developing a third version, which allows advertisers to again further future-proof their contractual arrangements with their advertisers, with their agencies, I should say. But what's kind of really important, I think, is that in all of the dysfunctional relationships that I've seen between advertisers and their advertising agencies, there are generally 2 fundamental reasons for that dysfunctionality. The first is a contract that just isn't good enough because it allows too many of the parties to wriggle out. That's the first thing. And the second thing is actually a bad remuneration structure. So if you can get a good contract in place with your agency partner, a really good one, which is fair and equitable, and then focus on a remuneration model that perhaps rewards value generation, then you're in pretty good stead, right? And so I think that was the next principle that we had within the guideline, remuneration.
Yeah, that's right. So we also provide some best practice guidance around remuneration. And this is really about making sure that you have the kind of payment model in place that really inspires and incentivizes your agency to deliver their best work.
And we actually found some quite interesting insights from the surveys that we conducted. So, you know, very few ISBA members actually look at value-based remuneration, which is paying for kind of outcomes and outputs. the majority actually sit within the kind of the hybrid model, right, where they're paying FTE for strategic leadership and also an element of commission. What did we get from the surveys that illustrate the direction of travel when it comes to remuneration?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think the direction of travel is towards hybrid structures. I think we are seeing a move away from commission-based models because they don't offer that same level of transparency in the media supply chain that more kind of labor-based fees might as well. I think just the other thing to mention here as well is, although no one is using kind of like a pure play value-based model, nonetheless, particularly based on the comments that we received in interviews and the surveys we did, there are ISBA members who are using allocating kind of a percentage of the agency's bonus based on to what extent they're driving business outcomes. But I think there's also a recognition that there are so many other factors beyond just media that drive a business result that it's important not to kind of put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to using a value-based payment structure. Well said.
Well said. What about the next one?
So the next one is around briefing and evaluating agency work. And I think, you know, along all this talk about contracts and remuneration, it's kind of easy to skip by those kind of core day-to-day behaviors that really contribute the most towards good relations with your agency. And a critical part of that is writing and delivering effective briefs, as well as making sure that you are providing a constructive interpretation of agency strategies and plans.
And did the people that we surveyed and interviewed, did we get an impression how many of them felt that currently their briefing was good or still needed work?
Yeah, so I mean, around 2/3 of ISBA members felt that their briefs and strategies were clearly stated, and also that their media briefs contained clear KPIs, which is definitely encouraging. I think what was interesting is, you know, ISBA members were also willing to be quite kind of reflect on their own behaviours. So alongside holding the agency to account, also recognising that things like giving the agency enough time to respond to a brief adequately, allowing enough time for two-way communication, making sure that agencies are briefed at the same time so everyone was receiving the same communication and can put their best foot forward. Those kinds of behaviours that kind of sit outside the core briefing document are just as critical. Yeah,
and I think, you know, I think it's really important. The power of briefing is often undervalued. I once asked an agency chief executive what made certain clients within his agency priorities, right? And all agencies, they might not admit it, but all agencies have a certain number of clients that they have within the top shelf that are priority, that get perhaps disproportionate value in all sorts of different elements in different ways. And I asked this CEO what it was that made his priority clients priorities. And he gave me the best answer of all. He said, those brands, those advertisers that are able to inspire my strategic thinkers with brilliant briefs that enable them to get out of bed on a Monday morning and come to work and think about that client's business, they're the ones that are priorities for him. So the power of inspiring through brilliant brief writing is incredibly important, not only because the end result, the end plan, the end thinking, the creativity that comes out at the end of it comes from the brilliance of the brief or the inspirational elements of the brief, but it also engages more of the thinkers within the agency, right? That's what you want to do. You want to attract the best thinkers within that agency to think about your particular challenge. And if it's an inspiring brief, you're more likely to get that done. So the power of the brief and then the interpretation of that strategy so that you can understand and appreciate what good strategy is a critical component of good agency management.
Yeah,
what about the next one?
Completely agree. And just to add to that, I mean, I would say something that we talk about at the very top of the guidelines is the difference between status and behavior. And of course, there's some things that brands can't control. You know, some brands come equipped with much bigger resources for investment. They might be deemed by the agency to be kind of a sexier brand to work with. But nonetheless, what you can control, irrespective of your size and scale, is your conduct and your behavior and how you work with your agency. And a critical part of that, of course, is communication with the agency, including briefing and those that can really galvanize agency teams, irrespective of what kind of brand they are. It is still possible to write an exciting, inspiring, and a motivating brief. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, actually, because the behaviors of advertisers to influence and affect your priority status is within your hands, right? I mean, it's basic courtesy, it's respectfulness, it's inclusiveness, it's the investment that you put into the briefing, it's the way that you engage, the inclusiveness with which you bring into the agency. All of these things have absolutely nothing to do with your media budgets or the type of category you operate in, but they are disproportionately more powerful actually in driving your priority status within the agency, you know, portfolio. I think that's a really good point. So Paul, what's the next one?
Yeah, so the final area that we look at as part of our guidelines is what we're calling relationship management, which is essentially about transparent and consistent performance management that drives both productivity and continuous improvement from your agency relationship.
Yeah, so having that two-way dialogue that allows you to course correct the relationship on a regular basis. But it's important also to have the agency provide a perspective on the behaviors of the client, right? I mean, it has to go both ways, and that comes as the partnership evolves. And how many of the ISBA members that we interviewed or surveyed had those things in place?
I mean, so we asked a number of different questions around this topic, but around 3/4 of ISBA members said that they conducted some form of agency buying or service evaluation on at least a 6-monthly basis. So, I mean, the encouraging thing here is there are some basic practices that we're seeing fairly consistently across a number of advertisers that show some positive, encouraging management of that relationship.
That's really good. So basically, I mean, in your kind of summary of the work that we've done with ISBA, and you know, how healthy a state do we have within the ISBA members when it comes to good practice, best practice in agency management? Are we tracking?
I think we're tracking well. I mean, I'm encouraged actually by reading what I've been reading in this report and reviewing the responses we've had from ISBA members. I think there's a lot to be really encouraged about here. And I think, you know, it's fair to acknowledge after a difficult few years when the media marketplace was very heavily commoditized, moving to kind of the ANA report and concerns around transparency. We're now moving, I think, towards a position where there is a mutual focus on building long-standing, sustainable partnerships. And actually, something interesting as well is I just think advertisers are changing their mindset towards a more always-on approach to agency management. So agency management is no longer something that happens in kind of discrete moments throughout the year, a QBR, for example. But this is actually something that is managed both formally and informally on a continuous basis.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear. Right, should we get Bobi back? See what if any feedback. Yeah, I know. Hi, Bobi. Welcome.
Hello, both you.
Do you think Paul did it justice? The 6 topics.
Do you know what? That was really great to hear you go through. And actually, I was very relieved with the answer of we are tracking well. I was waiting for a response for that one. So thank you. That's good.
Well, and as I said, thank you for stewarding the process so well. And so the white paper or the guidelines were published yesterday. They are downloadable for your members on the ISBA website, I understand, but perhaps there may be other opportunities to share it to a broader audience at a later stage. But I want to understand, what was the motivation behind instigating the initiative? Where did it come from? It's a brilliant initiative, by the way, and thank you for inviting us in. But where did it come from?
Well, let me give you a bit of a background. The way we work at ISBA, we've got a number of working groups, steering groups, which are basically passionate marketeers who want to basically share, learn, and establish best practice to essentially help shape the industry. And many of these media practitioners, they work in really small teams and often on their own. So having this group to work together and valuable, and people they work with externally is really valuable. Whether you're the person in the group asking the questions or whether you're the ones being able to give the answers, it's about working as a team, and they range from, all different areas, TV and video, to data, to insight, to diversity, to in-housing. This particular conversation came out of the Media Leaders group, and which is a really great group of media leaders, chaired by Lisa Walker from Vodafone. And it was interesting because when we brainstormed at the beginning of the year of what topics should we be covering in 2020, I remember the conversation being had that agency relations, is something that this group should keep an eye on and be aware of, but it wasn't necessarily something they needed to focus on at the time. But actually, as we progressed through COVID and businesses changed and the way people were working changed, it became a conversation in the group, how they were working with partners, how partners were supporting them, how they were needing to relook at how they're working internally and externally. So it stemmed from that initial conversation, and I think there just being additional pressures on both sides. And in that case, you need more effective working relationships, as you guys have just said. And so hence any practical guidelines were really useful. So then we engaged with you guys.
Yeah, it's good. And we love the process. And I suppose it's a bit too early to say, but how well has the document and the guidelines been received?
Well, the whole process, because what's great about working in this way and it being a two-way thing with the group is, through the whole way, everyone's been really engaged with it and part of the journey. So it's been really, really well received, and we're looking forward to being able to just get it out wider and broadening that conversation.
Really good. Paul, before you I'm sure you've got some questions as well. How are we going to track success, right? I love these guidelines, and I love the fact that we kind of issue them out, but there's always a danger that people will read them and not necessarily act on them. Is there a way, when you meet your kind of media leaders, is there a way that you can kind of gauge traction as to whether they've begun to implement them or whether they've been used to help influence certain initiatives and directions when it comes to their agency partnerships?
Yeah, do you know what? And I think that's why the challenge with when you produce a paper is that what you don't ever want it to be is just a thing that is read and disregarded. Right. These things have to be living pieces, living things. They need to just create a new way of acting, not so sort of, it's like the information that's on that page needs to be lifted up and become part of people's just way of being. And I when it comes to agencies, I love the word when people use partners. It doesn't, what's been great about lockdown is the fact that we've been engaging so much more with partners, because it's so with members, because it's so easy on Zoom to talk to more. and it's when you ask, especially through, you know, May, June time, you know, how's the relationship with your agency, and are they supporting you? And when brands come back and say, oh my God, they've been lifesavers, this has been amazing, it's just it's so brilliant to hear. And
yeah, that's
you know,
right.
That's where you want to keep, you know, these learnings from best practice to then brands that are doing it well. You want to keep the conversation going, and you want brands to share throughout. So we'll make sure it is just a stream, you know, a work line going through next year. And, you know, ultimately we should do this again next year so that we've got a benchmark and see how have we do it with the same group? How have they changed? How have they improved? How have they acted on it? You know, what brands want to be kept, brands want to be held accountable, because, you know,
Yes.
their business, they're driving, and everybody wants it to be you know, this industry to be the best it can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can completely agree. I was just going to, David, I hope you don't mind, I was just going to ask a quick question, Bobby, as well, because you raised a really interesting point around how actually almost counterintuitively some relationships you feel might have improved under lockdown. And I just think something interesting to add there is, you know, we run lots of service evaluations between advertisers and agencies. And I'm thinking about one particular evaluation we conducted recently. And across almost every category, the agency had kind of improved compared to the year before. And I think one interesting learning from that is, although the process of adaptation, I think, was quite difficult at the start of lockdown, it's actually forced advertisers and agencies to be far more disciplined in how they work with one another. I think we're far more conscious now of not wanting to take up someone's entire day with virtual Zoom meetings and that kind of thing. So it actually forces a kind of an extra degree of rigor, I think, on both sides, so that we're more sensitive of the constraints and the pressures that each other are working under.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I just think, you know, everybody's working just so much more effectively. You're conscious how many people you're bringing in the room, because you don't just slip another person onto a Zoom call. It's a much more thought out process. And you know, I think there's just there's a lot of learnings about working, and there has been a lot more reliance, I guess, on each side. You know, there's never, when you can't meet people face to face, the importance of having a great brief and things, that areas like that where you can't talk around the edges in the same way, and you can't, you know, you can't discuss it in the same way, and you can't use the body language in the same way. It's got to be much more nailed. So I think these areas, there's been a lot of progress in.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to kind of echo Paul's point about just the general sentiment that we have, that you know, the market is moving forward in a more sophisticated, professional way. And I mean, you have a hugely privileged position in that you get to speak to advertisers every day, all of the time. You know, they sit in your virtual conferences and your virtual board meetings, and they are in a safe environment, right? So it can often be quite cathartic, and they share their concerns and their insights and their worries and their successes openly. And I want to just ask you that question. Do you feel a sense of optimism? Because as a company, we are huge advocates of the power of partnership between brands that see media as a lever for growth and agency partners that can help kind of drive that forward, can help enable that to happen quicker. Do you get a sense within your media leaders team that there is you know, a sense of optimism moving forward in terms of how they will work closer, better, in more effective ways with their agency partners?
Yeah, I do, because I think also the more knowledgeable they are as brands, and the more, you know, the more they talk to each other and hear best practice, and the better they build, you know, and the more that relationship is a two-way thing. Yeah, I do see real optimism, and I see change, and it's really, as I said, it's so nice when you hear people talk about how they feel really supported and how they feel that they've got really good, strong teams. It's funny what you say about the groups, because when I first started at ISBA, I actually used to refer to them as therapy sessions. And it is really lovely that people can just start talking about all their, you know, what their challenges are, what their concerns are. And I think that, you know, that only strives to make it better. And it's just really positive that you've got these people who are taking their, you know, time out of their busy day jobs to work on things that actually are not necessarily personally beneficial, but are just there to make the industry a better place. And, you know, brands are really, you know, are doing some really good work and trying to drive change, positive change, which will, you know, good for everyone, for agencies, brands, media owners, everyone.
That's brilliant, Bobi. Thank you so much. Paul, any more questions for Bobi before I allow her to go and enjoy a weekend?
No, you can allow that now, David. Great,
thank you. Bobi, thank you. Thank you so much for being part of the show today. Thank you for championing such an important initiative. And the next time you decide to revisit it, please knock on our door first, if you would, because we love it.
Thank you. And thank you for being fabulous to work with. And have a lovely weekend.
Cheers, Bobi. Take care. Very good. Well, Paul, that kind of brings us to the close of the show. I mean, I think it's a brilliant initiative. I thought it was a really good piece of work. I'm hoping that the members of ISBA and those actually outside of the ISBA group who get to read it will find some sort of value from it. But as you said, it sends all the right messages. You know, the market is going in the right direction. Those advertisers that are responsible for significant media budgets in many cases are seeing media and their partnerships with their media agencies as critical to kind of long-term growth of their businesses. And so thank you for joining the show. Any final comments from you?
No, just other than thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed talking about the guidelines today. And you know, Bobi's comments have sparked lots of thoughts in my head about ways in which we can hold members and ourselves accountable to seeing how we progress with this next year when we run this again and speak to ISBA members again to see how agency management has evolved in a hopefully what is going to be a less turbulent year.
Yes, let's hope so. Thank you, Paul. Okay, that's it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.